The day is getting near to a close, but it's also just beginning. To get us inspired about where to go from here, we're excited to bring back Mei Lee. She's going to close us out, inspiring us to take all of this goodwill, energy, and connection and turn it into something positive. Joyfully subvert the status quo, and while finding meaning and community along the way. Please welcome Mei Lee Khoe.
I'm back, and I changed costumes. Because why not? I'm going to ask you to do a wave because you've been running around all day and you can make something together. Let's just do that. Can we start over here? Is that cool? We're going to start over here. You ready? It's just for me. I'm just going to keep this so that 40 years from now I can remember, look, I did that. Can you? All right, ready? We're going to start over there. 3, 2, 1. Woo! And we're going to go back. Ready? That was amazing. You all killed that. You look fantastic. Thank you. Did it feel good? You just made something together. It looked great. I mean, I was the main person to see it, but anyway. So hi, I'm Mei Lee. Nice to meet you again, for those of you that were here this morning. First, I want to know a little bit about you. So just a quick show of hands, when you think about the state of the world, the state of the globe today, is anybody feeling like it's hunky-dory, everything's cool, it's fine? How about people who are like, you know what, some things really need to change? Hands, show of hands, like really need to change. All right, okay, cool. That looked like pretty much everybody. So a little bit about me, just a tiny second. So I've worked as a designer for maybe over 20 years, and one of the things that I worked on was the first iPhone, back when the answer to developing apps was make web apps. So I worked on some of those, but I'm not going to talk about that today. Bye, Steve. Today we're going to talk about joyfully subverting the status quo. And to understand why this matters so much to me, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So when people ask me where I'm from, it's kind of a complicated question because it's a lot of places. I was born in the Netherlands. I was raised in Western Canada. I live in San Francisco. Actually, I'm living in Bogota, Colombia right now. And I'm here for this, so I'm here now. I have some ancestry in China and some ancestry in Indonesia. And about 20 years ago, I became part of a Colombian family, and I'm living there today. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is an event in Indonesia that changed my life before I was born. And in 1965, which was before I was born, somewhere between 500,000 and 2 million people were killed in a matter of months. And if you've never heard about this, I don't blame you, because most people have never heard about this. People don't realize it happened because a lot of the people that caused this to happen came into power. Now, at the time, it was kind of hailed as an anti-communist triumph. So you can see deep from the New York Times archives, in 1965, you kind of start seeing things like, killing of some Reds. We have a newspaper article showing the Australian Prime Minister at the time saying, with 500,000 to 1 million communist sympathizers knocked off, I think it is safe to assume a reorientation has taken place. One of the things that happened along with this was that the prime minister at the time, who had led Indonesia to its independence, was also deposed. So that was pretty much what I think most people heard about it, if they heard about it at all, for about 50 years. And then just over 2 years ago, a bunch of papers were declassified. So you can see that in some of these papers, many of the people that were killed had no connection to communism, and that there was US support happening for what was going on. So if you think about this, it's sort of mind-blowing that for 50 years, nobody knew about the story. In the meantime, I was speaking to primary sources. These were people in my family that were still too afraid to talk about the events. The history was being written by the people who came into power, and nobody ever talked about this. I only ever heard about it really in hushed voices behind closed doors. And that really affected me. Really, if those of you who have grown up knowing this, knowing that the dominant narrative around you isn't the one that's the reality of your experience, it really makes you question things. It makes you wonder whether or not when you're told a story and there's this dominant narrative, is that really what's going on? Or are some of the things that we're told are done in the name of idealism really about money and power? Why was it that we would support killing so many people in such a short amount of time? And I think that's what really led me to question, like, okay, what's going on with this dominative narrative? What's going on with these systems that might not necessarily support what I think is the best thing for humanity, or these humane ways of being? And that sort of led me to thinking about what's the status quo and how might it be better at a really early age. The other thing about me, I'm going to show you a picture of my mom. This is my mom. So shortly after my parents escaped from this bad situation in Indonesia in 1965, they wound up in Europe, which is why when people are like, you're from the Netherlands? How does that happen? And you can, some people put that story together really quickly and some people don't. So this is my mom around that time, and this is me and my mom. You can see we have some amount of resemblance. And my mom, I think she was working as a housekeeper at the time, even though she spoke something like 5 languages. She passed away exactly 23 years ago today, at 50 years old. So I was pretty young at the time, and that really forced me to think about how much time I have in life. And especially now, that bar looks pretty short, and I just don't know how long I'm going to have. So if you put those things kind of in your head and you think about the way that you approach life, I think some people sort of see it as this series of checks, like, okay, I'm going to graduate, find a job, partner, get married, get a job, hopefully raise a family, get a raise a bunch of times, and then retire. Kind of like a series of checks or something. Some people kind of, I don't know, a graph that goes up and to the right. I didn't name the axes. I don't know what they would be. But I like to think of my life as this big empty canvas that I can paint with whatever weird artwork that I feel like. Got a little bit of Chinese and Indonesian and Dutch and I don't know, whatever other random things, stuff. So if you look at that, you feel like maybe the status quo needs to change and life is short, and you put those, here's my mandatory Venn diagram of the talk. Subvert the status quo and have as much fun as possible along the way. And that's how I landed at that thesis. So you might be wondering a little bit about what this looks like. There's lots of different things, and many of you are already doing this. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples that I really love from the world in the last couple of years. The first one happened right here, Bay Area, in our backyard. There was this woman, nicknamed Barbecue Becky, called the police on a bunch of Black people who were having a barbecue on the edge of Lake Merritt, as has been happening for decades. And I feel like the community could have responded in a lot of ways, but this is how they responded. So one of the organizers, Jamel Robinson and Logan McWilliams, decided to organize a response. They invited everybody to come out for a big barbecue by the lake. And you can just see how the community has come together. Everyone is welcome. Thousands of people turned out. There was great food and dominoes. And this happened. And now it's a tradition, and it happens every year. Apparently, it's bigger and bigger every year. So this summer, I was away, and I heard it's still going on, which I'm very happy to hear about. So that's my first example. The second example is called Futbolistas for Life. One of the main people who empowered a lot of what happened here is Dania Cabello. She's an excellent artist and sports liberation educator, among many other things. She's also a founder. And she helped work with these students at a school called Life Academy, that's in Oakland. And that's it's a group of students who have dealt with a lot of adversity. I remember going on hunger strikes in solidarity with people in that school because the students, we were losing the students. Some of them were just lost to handgun death in the neighborhood. And you know, we talk a lot about raising test scores and all the stuff with students, but there's students out there who are just dealing with loss of other students. And there's teachers out there that are dealing with just losing people's lives out in the streets. And so the school, Life Academy, had a yard that was nicknamed the prison yard because, well, it looked like this. It didn't feel really great to play on. And something that was really important for a lot of the students was feeling like they had this space to play and this freedom and this ownership over their play and their bodies in a place that felt good, which they didn't have. So with Danya's help, and really the students did this, they organized and raised a whole bunch of money. They raised $100,000, found matching funds. I think it was around $700,000. And at the last minute, the district tried to say, I don't know if we can actually do this. I don't know if you can actually use that money to improve what they were calling the prison yard and turn it into what they really wanted. So I'll let you see what it was that they did.
2 years ago, we started a campaign to get this field built. We are not asking for handouts. We have done our part. Please do yours. Thank you.
In times when there's so many forces of oppression keeping us down and telling us that we're not important, having a space like a soccer field where we can play and love one another, that's an act of resistance. And the Futbolistas has been just that.
1, 2, 3.
Futbolistas!
So this is what it looked like beforehand, and if you drive by today, this is what it looks like now. And the students made it happen. Never underestimate young people, y'all. All right, so this is my third sort of example from out in the world over the last few years. This is a response to a Manhattan lawyer who didn't like the fact that there were a couple of employees at a food establishment speaking Spanish to each other. So he threatened to call ICE on the workers. And again, the community could have responded in all kinds of ways, but what they decided to do was give him a little serenade. This is outside his office. If anybody wants to sing along. Okay, I think that's excellent. So what does this look like in my own work? I'll walk through a couple of examples. I think one thing to remember is when you do these little joyful subversions, they can be really small. They don't have to be some sort of grandiose thing, and they don't have to be hundreds of people or thousands of people or anything. So I think one of the first ones was when face tracking, live face tracking came out and the technology came out. I managed to sneak little pink hearts into your Mac, if you have a Mac. And at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of pink happening at all on Mac OS, let alone women at all working on a lot of the designs. Not that pink and women are a thing. Anyway, but it does warm my heart to think that at some point in time I managed to get Steve Jobs to approve this face effect while pink hearts were flying out of his head. So that's one thing. It's just a little thing. I also managed to get Technics 1200s are an emblematic turntable in the history of hip hop, and the avatars on the Mac were, a lot of roses and I think some animals and things like that. So I made this and managed to get this along with some Easter eggs, and that's still alive in Mac OS, which I'm pretty excited about. Does anybody have this as their avatar on their Mac? I know a couple people out there. Another thing is just, taking daily interactions and just making them a bit more fun with emoji. With some of the executive team when I was VP of Design at Khan Academy, I tried to convince a lot of them to use emoji, and here's some evidence of the VP of Engineering throwing in lots of emoji. You know, when they first started out, all the correspondence was really dry, and we just, you know, spruced it up a little bit, along with our quarterly plans. I have a side project called Scribble Together that allows you to draw together over the distance. It's with my partner, Bridger Maxwell. And it's a drawing app, so you can make really, you know, lovely drawings with it, but mostly it's about scribbling. And we wanted to make that really clear. We wanted it to be very irreverent. And so unlike a lot of drawing applications that put these very intimidating, sophisticated drawings to make you want to start, we actually just lowered the bar, put a whole bunch of accelerometer-empowered glitter into the application to welcome you, and made sure that you're inspired to draw something we know you can draw, or, you know, or that you can work up to. And you can, you know, like stamp multiple unicorns and anyway, stuff like that. So there's just a couple of little things. Another thing you can do is experiment with format. So I think a little bit like today, you know, I'm choosing to do this today, but oftentimes a traditional talk format is like standing up here and talking like I'm doing. But I don't always do that. One thing that I've done is subvert the format of a talk and just make the entire audience get up and dance. I thought about making you all sing just now, but I don't know, I've passed on it. And I think this might be one of the best compliments I've ever gotten about a talk. I was like, Maya, shh. You're on to me. Another one is subverting tech. This one is pretty profound, obviously, you know, having worked as a technologist for a long time. We talk a lot about the epidemic of loneliness. Apparently 1 in 5 Americans feels like they're either feeling very lonely or socially isolated. And somehow we've accepted the fact that computation has to be locked behind these little rectangles. You know, our work looks a lot like this, or like this. Or we put the screens even closer to our faces. And it's funny that, you know, how many years into the journey of computers are we, and we still accept the fact that we can get locked behind things this way? So you can ask yourself, what would happen if we turned computers inside out? Let's just take this stuff. Instead of taking the screen and sticking it closer to closer, let's just like make it flexible and take it off. Take it off our faces, get it out of this box. What does that look like? And there's an organization in Oakland, this is a nonprofit organization as well, called Dynamic Land. And basically, yeah, I mean, it's like, imagine being at a craft table with friends. It looks kind of like this. It's like you're cooking together, or you're, I don't know, scrapbooking or something, except all of that's all software. We're building things together. This is a prototype that I built for kids that allows them to connect physical quantity with symbolic quantity with creative output. In this case, it just controls the number of petals on a little flower. And here's one of my rounds of unofficial user testing. Let's see if I can get this slide to forward. There you go.
Wow, that's crazy. You want to put some more here? As many as you want.
So you can see how that feels pretty different. So another thing I like to do is subvert tech. Sometimes you have these prototypes and they're very serious. And in this particular case, Polite had built this token table, which is this magical table that would move things around on its surface. Almost kind of like you could imagine this maybe, I don't know, in Disneyland or something, where it feels like there's little ghost moving stuff, except it's actually just a bunch of mechanical arms under the table. But the prototype had kind of been sitting there. People hadn't really been very active with it. So we decided to like subvert that a little bit. So we decided to flush it up. It was Halloween, so it's Halloween appropriately themed. And this is what wound up happening. It's a little bit of a delay, but this really got people to rally a little bit around the prototype again. And a similar thing, when we were working on this thing called HyperCard in the World, at that moment in time, it was, you could point a laser at an object in the room and it would respond. And it was a little dry. Everybody in the lab was still working kind of in their different corners of the room. So I decided to bring in some irreverence and turned it into a diorama about the Serengeti. And soon enough, everybody started crowding around and adding to it. And so all of a sudden, we had this collaboration happening where there wasn't one happening before. In the end, it wound up working a little bit like this. So you can imagine everybody contributed drawings, sound bites, and we just kept on piling on because why not? In this last one, it was a little bit, another use of the work we had going on in Dynamic Land was to figure out how can I just totally subvert this entire space and turn it into something different. And one of the ways to do that is obviously with music. So I put a little Prince into the space. What this did was take over everybody's prototypes and just make it rain purple everywhere. It's really hard to cut off that song. I'm sorry. So speaking of creating a space, as I mentioned earlier, I've been part of a Colombian family for about 20 years. And creating a space for change means that you're not necessarily doing it yourself. You're just making, it's a lot like this. You're all here together. All kinds of things are going to happen. You're probably forming new friendships. All kinds of magic will happen as a result of that. And in this particular case, we were thinking about spaces for parties. Because when you search for party in Google, you get this. And to me, this looks like either you're at a children's birthday party, you're standing around drinking, or you're at a club, right? And in Colombia, when you stand around with drinks, that's not called a party, it's called a meeting. So we were like, this is not cool. Let's make something better. We wanted to make a space for better parties in the Bay. And this was just over 10 years ago. And all of us had pretty deep crates. So we said, why don't we start a party series? And that's how La Pelanga was founded. So this is a DJ coalition. There's a bunch of us. Here's us. This is when we DJ'd at Cal Academy. And I didn't let any of my teammates play songs about cooked fish because I was like, oh no, they'll be sad. Don't play that for the poor fish. So some of the things we've done is curate party nights around the Bay. This was the first night we did. It was a fundraiser for Haiti. And I'll just share some of the designs for some of the parties we've hosted. We brought in live bands, a lot of them from East LA. You'll see a couple of those acts. Also Bay Area local stuff. Here's the whole thing together, inspired by 1960s and 70s record covers. And we brought in some really great acts. We brought in Chicano Batman, and they've made it pretty big now. Las Cafeteras, I think we were some of the first people to bring them into the Bay Area. They're also huge now. I'll just share a little of what it looked like back then. This is old footage of me and slightly embarrassing, but I'll share it with you anyway. Oh, some of you caught the name? I like that. All right. That's enough of that. All right, in this next example, this is really about symbolism. I think when you think about dominant narrative and you think about status quo, symbolism is a big part of that because symbols and stories, a lot of how we relate to each other is through symbols and stories. So in this particular project, you kind of think about a traditional art gallery space and what you expect to have in there, who's in there, what it feels like. You can imagine what would happen if we turned that upside down and maybe made it feel a little different. And what if we went even further? So in this case, the lead artist, Sita Baumick, and a whole bunch of collaborators that you can see in this list took over a gallery space and made a replica of the border wall that was being proposed out of piñatas.
Even though it's this fake wall, it's the feelings around it are real.
So here's some examples of what it looked like when it was under construction. And at the end of the project, where the wall had already been tagged up by a bunch of artists and youth in the neighborhoods, We filled the whole place with community. You can see a bunch of the collaborators in this photograph, and had a demolition party. You know, they're piñatas. That's what you do.
It really does feel like this wall kind of took on a life of its own.
This is called a guajolota. It's a common food in Mexico City. So it's a tamal, and it's inside of a piece of bread. So it's really like one of those filling foods of labor that would propel your work through the course of the day. We're getting serious with this border smashing.
So you can see a couple of stills, and the place was completely transformed. Like, you go back that initial shot of a gallery, and then you imagine the floor looking like this. All right, in this next example, I did talk a little bit about building on history. I think change is rarely straightforward, and unlike the covers of magazines tend to show, it doesn't tend to happen with one person on their own, right? So we have a lot of room to build on history. We have a lot of room to build on the tremendous work of all the people who have worked really hard on changing things for the better before us. And one group of people who did something that's pretty important are the Black Panthers. One thing that people don't realize about them is that they instituted a free breakfast program for children. Again, we talk a lot about education and raising test scores and all that sort of thing, but if people are hungry when they come to class, it's really hard to focus. When I was looking at statistics for this talk, there was something like 1 in 5 or 1 in 8 American children are struggling with hunger. And it was somewhere between 11 million and 18 million, something like that. And this free breakfast program actually wound up being the blueprint of the federal free breakfast program that happens today, which allows a lot of kids to start focusing on their studies and not be struggling with hunger while they're in school. At the time, it was potentially the greatest threat to national security, according to the director of the FBI. Taking that as inspiration, a group of artists called the People's Kitchen Collective in Oakland put together a 500-person free meal in West Oakland. I'm going to let them show you a little bit about it.
We have been building to this last meal called Streets. A 500-person meal down a city block.
Welcome, everyone. I'd like to invite you to take your seats.
This long table is an imprint.
The street is a reminder of what we've collectively been creating together.
In the face of eviction and displacement and gentrification in the neighborhood.
We want it to feel like the living room of West Oakland this afternoon.
These are recipes of resilience. The strength of our communities is at its heart the meals that we share together. And the Panthers recognize that with a free breakfast program for school children and People's Kitchen Collective. We try to continue that work and that legacy.
So there's some more footage from the same event. And I played some music. So that's that one. This last one I'll talk a little bit about is just shifting the nature of work. Because I, spent many years in sort of conference rooms that look something like this. At some point in time, after being at Apple for a while, I felt like I wanted to do something a little different, and I wound up joining Khan Academy. And there were a couple of reasons I was attracted to it. I think one of them was that it was a not-for-profit that was building software. I think that's pretty rare. I thought, well, what would happen if our incentive systems were a little different? And I was excited to think about democratizing learning. Obviously, the mission was really profound for me. And then the last thing was really about the culture, because I felt as if the organization was really open to some experimentation with cultural shifts. So in the beginning, I focused a lot on trying to move a lot of what educational technology looks like this kind of a thing, where you're just interrogating young people and saying like, do you get it yet or not? And switching it to something a little different where maybe we instead empower our students using mathematics and maybe they're wandering around this magic world and understanding the mathematical concepts actually gives them power. Here you see the little coordinate system. You can accidentally discover negative numbers if you just go the other direction. Or maybe we can use the dynamic medium so students can actually explore the very nature of numbers. And one of the things that we found here is the side effect, like odd numbers will always have that little bit sticking out and even numbers won't. We found like visual and interactive properties of prime numbers. All kinds of interesting stuff dropped out. The other thing is that over time I found myself in a position of building the team. There's all kinds of things that happen behind the scenes when you're building a team, thinking about all the processes and cultural stuff that's going on. And I had a lot of fun. We took ourselves super seriously. Obviously, did very serious design team things like design systems. We made a design system and we set up a entirely new creative direction. We used photos. And we're very careful about the ways that we thought about how photography should be used. But really, I think at the end of the day, one of the things that'll stick with me is the reactions we got.
Yeah. Here we go.
Yep, we here. Start from the bottom, now we here.
So I think we agreed. Many of you raised your hands. Feel like there's some things we could change. That's something that's probably deeply personal to you, but I'm excited that you feel that way. And maybe, some of you feel a bit like me. You don't know how long you have, and maybe you want to change some stuff. I think that as designers, we have a special place in the world. Like, I don't want to be too exceptionalist about design, but I do feel like people tend to have a very vivid imagination when they work in design. You actually literally have the tools, and you're constantly drawing possible futures, if you think about that. Like, when you're iterating, you are literally drawing multiple possible futures. So if you take a second and think about something that you really actually want to change, and you look around you, and these are so many potential co-conspirators, this is really an invitation to you to make some friends and start some shit and joyfully subvert the status quo. Thank you.